Hello, everybody. I'm Emma, and this is our fall preservation series. Today, we're going to talk about paper, and Rena's here to lead us through it. I'm Emma Prince. Backlog is my little company. I started about 18 months ago. I was out at Maryville University as their university archivist for 5 years before going out on my own. We've got some historical societies and a couple of high schools locally in St. Louis as our clients. And I'm a certified archivist.
Hi, I'm Rena Shergan. I've been an archivist for the Archdiocese of St. Louis for 9 years, and I've been working in the library and archives field since 2007. I've worked at the University of Chicago, and I've had internships that included the Field Museum, the Smithsonian, and the National Archives.
So before we get going, so Backlog does genealogy research, family digital archives, and then also institutional archives. And by institutional archives, I mean for high schools or historical societies, anything that's not your private collection in your attic. And if you're interested in learning more about our services, our email is hello@backlog-archivist.com. And this is just a couple of our past projects. That's me up on the top right with the archives volunteers at St. Louis University High School. They've been a client. Underneath that, we've got a German baptismal certificate that we've translated. We also do some French translations. That one's in German. And then on the left, we also do family digital archives. So we'll scan them, take the metadata. So we record anything that's written on the back, and then we upload it to the cloud where you can share it with your family. And so if you're interested in learning more about our services, I always like to just chat on the phone for about 15 minutes to do an archival needs assessment, see what you're interested in, and how you want to share your materials with your family. All right, and with that, Rena's going to take over and tell us how to store our paper.
Thanks, Emma. Family records are precious and sentimental. They tell a story, they elicit memories, they help us piece together the place and time in which our ancestors lived. So today's talk, I'm going to provide you with some information on the major factors that you need to consider to protect and preserve those records, specifically paper. Now, before we start, I want to distinguish between preservation and conservation. So preservation refers to the prevention of damage to an item to try to extend its life expectancy. Conservation includes preservation practices, but it also specifically refers to the physical treatment of damaged items. So today we're going to be talking about preservation, or how to protect records to the best of our ability so that they don't get damaged. Next slide, please. Paper is one of the most important developments in our history. Papyrus was the first paper-like material produced in Egypt around 3000 BCE or possibly earlier. The development of paper as we know it today is attributed to the Chinese, although the exact date is unknown. The oldest paper fragments ever discovered in China date back. Paper making was primarily done by hand until the invention of the paper making machines in the early 1800s. The Fourdrinier machine of 1806 is considered the first successful continuous paper making machine. Next slide. The composition of paper, oops. Next one. There we go. The composition of paper can vary greatly, but its main ingredient is wood pulp or other fibrous plant material. Prior to the late 1800s, paper commonly included a high linen and cotton content and didn't use many chemical additives. So when the demand for paper increased, the quality of the ingredients decreased to keep paper production cost effective. Manufacturers began adding all sorts of materials and chemicals to the process. And this means that paper that predates the late 1800s is actually often sturdier and longer lasting than paper that was produced in the 1930s. So when you're thinking about your materials, environment is actually the #1 cause of the deterioration of records. The best environments to keep your materials are devoid of light and don't have major fluctuations in temperature and humidity. UV light speeds up the chemical reactions that occur within your items. So it can cause the ink to fade on your pages and your newspaper clippings to become brown and brittle. If you want to frame something for display, I highly suggest that you have a copy made for display so that you don't allow the original item to become damaged by light. Temperature and humidity issues are another consideration. Really hot, humid environments will increase deterioration. Very dry environments, whether that's hot or cold, are also detrimental to materials. Worst of all, it's the fluctuation in temperature and humidity that's going to cause the most damage to items. So the humidity and heat causes molecules to expand, and the dry, cool temperatures causes them to contract. And this back and forth process over time compromises the molecular structure of the items and causes it to become warped or brittle. Next slide. So in archives, they usually monitor these environmental factors and control them with an HVAC system. But you're likely not going to be investing in the kinds of HVAC systems that archives do. So the best place that you want to store your items is out of the light and in areas where the temperature and humidity is consistent and comfortable to the human body. So maybe in a closet on the first floor. You want to likely avoid the attic because the temperatures can get really hot and humid in the summer and then drop significantly in the winter. And basements can also be a risk. If you're going to store in basements, you want to make sure you store your records at least 2 feet off the ground in case there's any flooding. Basements can also get very humid, which can encourage mold growth, and they're a favorite residence of pests. So you want to consider these factors when you're storing materials. Wherever you decide to keep your materials, be sure that you're checking on them periodically just to make sure that they're happy and healthy. Next slide. The basic tenet of conservation and preservation is to do no harm. We never want to compromise the integrity of our records by performing actions or treatments that cannot be undone. So there's a lot of common office supplies that you'll want to avoid if you can. Tape of any kind is sticky and it leaves a residue. It should only be safely removed by a conservator. If you try to do it yourself, you'll likely damage the item. Paper clips and staples can rust over time, and that's going to cause corrosion on the paper that's surrounding it. So you want to carefully remove these from your documents. If you do need to fasten things together, you can consider using plastic clips, but note that these are still going to cause indentations in your paper. Rubber bands become crumbly and can stick to or stain your documents. If you need to tie things together, consider using unbleached cotton string. Pen ink is permanent. Only use pencil since this can be erased. You'll want to be cautious about even using pen at all while you're around your documents because you can accidentally transfer it from your hand to the documents if you're moving back and forth from a notepad to your documents. Again, we want to try to avoid things that can't be undone. So if you're ever writing directly onto items, you always want to write on a hard surface and always use pencil. You never want to write on a soft surface because that's going to cause permanent indentations in your paper. Plastic sheet protectors might seem like a good idea, but they can actually deteriorate themselves. I don't know if you've ever seen an older wrinkled sheet protector. So when they wrinkle and shrink, they're compromising the shape of your document or photograph inside. I'll talk about alternatives to plastic sheet protectors in a little bit. Lamination cannot be undone, so avoid it, please. Again, I'll discuss some other options of providing extra protection to documents on the next slide. And lastly, it's a common misconception that archivists use white gloves to handle everything all the time. And this isn't true. We only use them when we're handling photographs and artifacts. You actually don't want to use them when you're handling paper, because if you do, you can't feel the pages between your fingers and you're more likely to tear the paper. So instead, before you start handling your documents, just wash your hands very well. Next slide, please. You may want to provide extra protection for documents that are fragile, tearing, or particularly precious to you. You'll also want to do this for items that could cause damage to other items. So for example, if you have a crayon drawing that could rub off wax onto other documents. So instead of using those plastic sheet protectors, you should ideally use Mylar sleeves, which is an inert polyester. You can purchase them from an archival supplies company. They have a slight static electric cling inside that keeps the documents or the pieces in place. So in this picture, you can see that the letter was torn. And then when you have it in the Mylar sheet, even if you hang it upside down, it's still going to stay in place. So this makes it a really great solution for items that are tearing or in pieces. It'll keep them together. Next slide. Oh, wait. I'm sorry. One more note. So Mylar sleeves, they can get expensive, so you may not want to encapsulate every single document you have in Mylar. Your budget backup plan should be to either store the item alone in its own folder or to interleave your documents between acid-free or bond paper. So bond paper itself isn't acid-free, but it's made with at least 25% cotton. So it's soft and it has a lower acid content than regular paper. It's cheaper and it's a less effective alternative, but it does still provide you with some protection. Now it's the next slide. Enclosing your records in folders and containers is an excellent preservation method to protect them from the elements and damage. Avoid regular cardboard boxes because these are really pretty, they're very acidic. Ideally, you would use acid-free folders and boxes from an archival supplies company. Because they are specialty items, they can be a little pricier than regular office supplies. If you are on a budget, you can consider buying acid-free products from general office supply manufacturers, but you'll want to be warned that the quality is not guaranteed. So lots of commercial companies use the word archival to describe their products. This is not a regulated term on the market, and it doesn't necessarily mean that the product meets professional preservation standards or that the products have been tested over time. So just be aware of this before you purchase any acid-free or quote archival products from general office supply manufacturers. Plastic containers are not archival quality containers. There can be long-term preservation issues with plastic. However, if you're weighing the environmental conditions of your home and your budget, plastic containers could be a good option if you have strong concerns about water and insect damage. If you do purchase plastic, make sure that it's PVC free because there's fewer chemicals. If you don't have a high risk of water or insect damage, I would recommend that you avoid plastic. Acid-free boxes are going to be your best choice. Next slide. So continuing to think in that vein of do no harm, you want to store your materials in a way that's least harmful to their shape and structure. So here are some good things to keep in mind. The first is that you want to keep papers flat as much as possible. If you unfold things, flatten them out. Take letters out of envelopes and keep the letter and envelope together. As long as you keep the documents in a folder in order all of the time, you're not going to lose track of which letter goes to which envelope. This is generally how archives keep track of things. You can also use plastic clips to keep things together. But as I mentioned earlier, these will likely leave indentations in your paper. If you decide to go with plastic clips, don't clip all of the files in just the upper left-hand corner, or else one side of your folder is going to accumulate a lot of girth. Instead, you can stagger the clips so that one set of documents is clipped on the left-hand side, one set in the middle, one set on the right-hand side, and so on. This is going to distribute the height more evenly. And you don't want to store oversized items in smaller spaces where they can curl or fold. So try to keep your documents flat as much as possible. Similarly, when you organize your records into folders, make sure the folders are stored as flat as possible as well. You can stand them upright in the box, or you can lay them flat in the box. You don't want to underfill or overstuff your box. If you store your folders upright in the box, make sure there isn't lots of extra space, or else the files will slump and curl over time. If the folders aren't filling the box while they are situated upright, you can use something to prop them up inside or simply lay them down flat in the box. Likewise, if you cram too many items into a box, they aren't going to be comfortable and it can cause stress on the documents. A good rule of thumb is that you can remove a folder without resistance, and you can insert a folder into the box without struggling. And lastly, score your folders. This is such a simple but effective preservation method. Did you ever notice that there's little score marks at the bottoms of your folders? If you have a significant amount of materials in your folder, score the mark that's closest to the thickness of the papers inside. This is a really simple step that can keep your folders from slumping inside the box. Next slide, please. And I'll take some time to specifically address newspaper clippings. The quality of newspaper is very poor. It's made of wood pulp, recycled newspapers, various chemicals, and other random things that might make it into the grinder. This means that it's highly acidic and it will quickly deteriorate over time, no matter what you do. If you notice how brown and brittle an old clipping can get, that is the deterioration process at work. An exception might be made for some early newspapers. Like I mentioned in the beginning of this presentation, paper from the 1800s and prior generally had more cotton content, and thus they are lasting better than, say, your news clippings from the mid-20th century. You never want to store your news clippings next to other types of documents. It will leave an acid burn stain on those other documents. Your best option is to make a photocopy or a digital copy of the clipping so that you can retain the information within. If you really want to keep the news clipping itself, then I would recommend that you interleave it, or that you put it in a Mylar sleeve, or you interleave it in bond paper. If you have a news clipping that's looking particularly shabby, this is the only time you'll ever hear me suggest lamination. So again, lamination is one of those irreversible treatments that we want to avoid. But if your news clipping is just falling apart, and because newspaper is such poor quality, lamination could be the lesser of two evils. If you do laminate it, be sure to make a photocopy or a digital copy of it first so that you have that image on hand. I do not recommend lamination for any other types of records. Next slide. Identifying and describing your collection is actually a really great way to preserve your papers, because it allows you to reduce handling of items because you can more easily find them and retrieve what you need. So here are a couple tips for that. The first is to title every folder and box. Try to include a topic, a person's name, or the types of documents within. For example, if one folder includes only your grandmother's records, you can call it the Martha Smith papers. If it's primarily news clippings, then call it the Smith family news clippings or just news clippings. Write dates or years on your folders. It might be a single year or it might be a year span. This just helps further describe the content within your folder. Spell out words. Avoid abbreviations and acronyms as much as possible, because these aren't always going to be apparent to future caretakers of the records. You want everyone who follows you in this role to know what's been written on the folder or on the documents. And lastly, print neatly and avoid cursive. Again, we want our loved ones to be able to read what we've written. As you know, cursive is no longer taught in a lot of schools, so printing neatly will eliminate the guessing. That's next slide. So everything I discussed are just some of the basic considerations and steps that you can take to protect your papers and ensure they're preserved well into the future.
So we'll take questions in just a second. In October, we're going to do another webinar and we'll tackle photographs, and I will give that one. And then Rena will be back in November to talk about book preservation with us. And then in December, I will do AV materials, and that will include different kinds of home videos and maybe a little bit of, old SIM cards and digital camera things. But I will pop the link to register for our upcoming webinars in the chat. So it's the same registration process as for this one. And then we're here for questions. If anybody has anything or anything specific that you'd like Rena to address.
Hi, Rena. This is Gail. I'm Dwight's cousin. You may know Dwight from the Archdiocese.
That's right. Hi, how's it going?
Hi, I'm great. I have a ton of stuff now that I need to preserve. And some of that is paper that has been rolled up. What's the best way to flatten that and preserve it?
So rolled paper can be flattened through a humidification process. You can look online. I believe, I want to say it's the National Park Service actually that has a document about how to set up a humidification system to unroll documents. So you don't want high humidity, obviously, because then you could cause mold growth on your items. But the system just provides a little bit of humidity so that the molecules in the paper relax out and they can be flattened. So you may want to look into that. I would just caution anybody who's trying that to make sure that they follow the directions very specifically, because of course you don't want to drop your papers into the water. If ink comes into contact with water, you're going to end up with some severe, damage because it'll spread. So just be aware of what you're doing and just be very careful in that process. You can also, I'll just say, you can also contact a conservator to do it for you.
And Rena, we have a question in the chat. The question is, what about documents that have stamps on them? Something like an old document with a revenue stamp?
So I'm guessing you're not talking about an ink stamp. Maybe you're talking about like a seal that's been stuck on the document, possibly. Regardless, or maybe a wax seal. The method of preservation would be the same. If you're concerned about it rubbing onto other documents, you can interleave it in bond paper. You can put it in a Mylar sleeve to protect it a little bit further, particularly if you're worried about the wax seal or the shiny embossed seal from falling off of the document. If it's already fallen off, I wouldn't recommend re-gluing it. I would just recommend keeping it with the document so that they aren't separated. But otherwise, you're going to follow the same preservation methods as with any other paper.
So if you're interested in learning more about our services, please go ahead and email us at hello@backlogarchivist.com to schedule an archival needs assessment. And this can be for your personal papers or for an institution that you might volunteer at, like a historical society. If you have any more questions, feel free to unmute yourself and go ahead and ask it. We'll wait about another minute for questions. And then we hope to see everybody in October.
Yeah, I'll say that I was really excited that Emma had set up this series of webinars, because it breaks down everything into small chunks. So you're not sitting here for an hour or two, just about 20 minutes, half hour. So I hope you guys attend the rest of these. They're going to be really great.
Rena, we got another question in the chat. What about old cards with stamps and ink on one side and pictures on the other? Should they be interwoven with the acid-free paper?
So so I think you might be talking about postcards that are printed photographs. And then, they used to take photographs and then turn them into postcards. So you do have a different, it's no longer just paper if you have an actual photograph printed there. There's a whole set of chemical processes that are occurring, on that top of that photograph. Actually, Emma's going to be talking about photographs in the October session, right? So I would highly suggest you go to that one for your photograph needs. But basically, yeah, you will be taking care of it. Yeah, just like you thought, putting it between acid-free paper or bond paper. Mylar sleeves are a great way to protect things. And then again, keeping things flat, making sure they're in folders that are labeled, making sure you can access that item easily.
Hi, this is Emma's cousin, Lisa. I have a question about some records that I have that are like birth certificates and death certificates and passports and things like that. I actually put them in a photo album many years ago. And so that was a bad idea. And so they're kind of stuck in there now, and I'm afraid to remove them. Do you have any suggestions on how to care for that at this point? Like, would that take a professional to kind of peel them back off? Or?
Yeah, so you had them in one of those sticky photo albums.
Yeah, it was a bad idea, but it
I
didn't
know
seem
we
like
all
it
make
at the time.
we all make bad decisions though, so don't feel guilty. You're definitely not the only one. So yeah, because of that stickiness that's inside the album, you can if it's paper that's stuck in there, you can try to see if you can lift it. Like the passport book, if that cover is slightly like laminated or smooth, you might be able to peel it off. But if you're experiencing any major resistance, or you see anything tearing or anything, you definitely, of course, want to stop as soon as possible, or don't try to take it out. But yeah, a conservator is going to be your best bet to removing those items, because that stickiness it's not easily reversible with anything we can do in our own homes, unfortunately.
Thank you. That's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Sometimes over time, those albums, they'll just lose the sticky quality to them, but how long that's going to be, it all depends. So.
Well, if there are no other questions, we'll go ahead and end here. But if you have any questions that come to you later, go ahead and email us at that hello email address. And then I hope to see everybody in October when I cover photographs. But thank you everyone for attending.
Yeah, thank you.